I don't do this often, but today I'm going to tell you things to avoid, things that you don't want to do to be able to optimize your health, especially that of your gut. Your gut is so important. It is literally 1-to-1 equal of importance to your overall body's health because it is so intertwined, interconnected. And as you know, those little guys in your gut, the bacteria primarily, but the viruses, protozoa, the fungi, all of the things that live there are literally outnumbering you. There are more of them than there are human cells in your body. And there is way more of their genetic material, way more DNA in these microbes that comprise your microbiota than you have DNA in your human genome. So is it important? Absolutely. I cannot stress enough the invaluable nature of gut health. And this podcast is going to get right into it. We're going to start hitting it right from the top. Some of the top 10, well, you know, those top 10 lists, maybe you guys watched back in the day. It was Jay Leno. And then I think prior to him, Johnny Carson, the late shows and all that. They always had a top 10 list of something. I love the top 10 list. I don't know. It was so much fun. Well, I literally put a top 10 list in my book, and you're going to have to go search it out and grab it, but it's all there. But I'm going to share with you my top 10 things to avoid. And this is unique for me because I usually tell you what to do. And I don't like to be too much of a naysayer and say, don't do this, don't do that. I mean, I got 6 kids, and you know what you do when you tell your kids, don't do this, and you turn your back and look around, they're doing exactly what you said to do. They're telegraphing. I mean, it's pretty wacky stuff. So I more likely enjoy and find helpful to tell you the things that are good to do, what to do. All the do's are way far and wide. They outnumber the don'ts, but there's a couple of don'ts that you really got to pay attention to, that you really need to know about, because many of them are just so dang readily available. We don't even think about it. And in fact, just to get into it, I'm going to share with you a special case, a patient that's life changed literally with this whole concept of gut health. And just for the intent of this, we're obviously going to change his name. We're going to change his name to Little Johnny over here. But Little Johnny was this perfect little human, beautiful baby boy, and born right out of the get-go to a mom that had a little bit of a fever. And this mom was in the hospital. And so, like is often done when you have what's called a peripartum fever, they put mom on some antibiotics, and sometimes even later on baby on antibiotics. But this baby got exposure to antibiotics early in life through the womb, so to speak. Mom was in the hospital, had a little bit of a fever, got some antibiotics even prior to birth, prior to the delivery process. And so this little perfect little baby Johnny got exposed to antibiotics early in life. And then as the years went by, this little boy was, like most little boys, was rough and tumble. He went to school. He was all around lots of other kids who were getting all sorts of runny noses and earaches and all these kinds of, I think he even for a time was in a daycare type setting where he was with a bunch of other little kids, and the illness is just rampant, right? In these kind of settings. And he would seem to always get ear infections. And sadly, his primary care doctor at that time was doing what most doctors do, was just writing prescriptions left and right for amoxicillin and penicillin and all these Cillins, right? All these antibiotics that he was getting. In fact, I think by the time he was 5, he had been already on half a dozen prescriptions for antibiotic prescriptions. And after this, he started to develop it just got worse and worse, some stomach issues, as mom would later describe to me, that were really difficult. He would often wake up in the middle of the night. He couldn't sleep well. He'd get these stomach pains that even at one point, I recall, mom tells me that he was brought to the local ER where they even had to do a CAT scan because they thought maybe he had appendicitis. He was in that much pain. Thankfully, he did not have appendicitis, did not require a surgery or anything, but his bowels were messed up. And the usual thing, you know, he went to his pediatrician, a bunch of medications, sadly, that were not helping, surprise, but they put him on things like an acid constipation remedies, these big gun types of stuff that would really get that stool rolling. And he tried all the things and it was not helping much. And finally, I got wind of it talking to mom. She told me all about what was going on, and we had to back up. We had to go way back, all the way, like I said, to the birth process when he was first exposed to antibiotics, and then later all those different ear infections and sinus infections and sore throats and pharyngitis, tonsillitis, all the things that he got prescriptions for, which he may or he may not have needed. And I'm just going to quote you a study, which I think is pretty interesting because it is often not appreciated. This was actually from the American Academy of Family Physicians. So one of the biggest bodies of primary care doctors, primary physicians in all of the US, they determined that more than 80% of healthcare visits for both adults and children who had sinus, what they determined to be sinusitis, resulted in an antibiotic prescription, more than 80% of the visits. And most may not know this, but the overwhelming majority, over 90% of the sinusitis type infections are actually viral, meaning they don't actually get better with antibiotics. You may say, well, I got better the last time. Well, maybe you would have gotten better anyway, even without the antibiotics. And that's a challenging thing. As a physician myself, I've definitely heard dozens and dozens of people say, well, last time I got this, the doc gave me the XYZ pack, whatever it was, right? They gave me some medication. I got better. I want that medication this time too. And so it's a little bit hard to break the cycle. And what is known and often not disseminated is that antibiotics, though super, super helpful, and this is how we initially have been able to, 100 years ago or so, when we first started to have access to these, we were able to increase our lifespan because people were dying of infections. And so our mortality rate, was way, way lower about 100 years ago until we started having access to antibiotics. And that was getting better and better, our lifespan all the time until several years prior to COVID. Many of you may know this now because I've shared about it several times. Our lifespan right here at home in the US has started to drop, and the developed world for that matter has started to drop. This is even predating COVID. Our life is getting shorter. And so my children may actually live less long than myself. And I certainly don't want this for them. I don't want it for you, but this is the first time in recent human history, well more than 100 years, that our lifespan is actually shortening. It's decreasing. And one of the biggest advents and helps and utilities of lengthening our lifespan 100 years or so ago, when we started to use routinely when needed, antibiotics was one of the things that greatest helped, because people were dying of infection in and around childbirth was a common time. And also obviously pneumonias and skin infections and things that got out of control, joint infections, all these kinds of things. They did not have antibiotics available. So what did it do? It just spread to the body, causing a blood infection. They got sepsis and they died. And that decreased the lifespan tremendously. But since antibiotics, which are literally a godsend, they've helped us so much, and they are so important when they are needed. But sadly, oftentimes they are not needed and they are prescribed unnecessarily. In fact, the CDC itself reports that as many as 1 in 3 prescriptions for antibiotics are deemed unnecessary. A third of the time, prescriptions for antibiotics may be unnecessary. In my experience, I would agree that many prescriptions, especially when given in the outpatient world, your family practice doc, your provider, your care practitioner, it's the middle of cold and flu season, you have the sniffles, you got sinus pain, you got an earache. Way too often, a knee-jerk response is a prescription for some sort of antibiotic. And I get why it happens. The patients come in requesting it. It's hard to say no, right? The doctors don't want them to be upset with them for saying no, so they feel obligated, even though most of them know pretty well that these infections are largely virus-based, viral, and so antibiotics don't really work for them. But they're also graded, right? They get these scores where the patient rates them on a scale of 1 to 5 or 1 to 10, and they say, how much they like their doctor, and if the doctor doesn't do what they thought that they were going to, do at the outset of the visit, or their expectation was different than what the doctor's was, or whatever it was, they may grade them poorly. And the docs don't want that, because there's an element of their pay that hinges upon these scores. I know maybe I haven't shared that before, but it's true. I was in that world, and it's sad because it doesn't help with our, what we may call stewardship, right? Antibiotic stewardship. And so, yes, antibiotics can be life-saving. They can be so critical, crucial, and important, but so sad and true that oftentimes they are inappropriately prescribed, at least a third of the time unnecessary by the CDC. And I would say this is super conservative. I would say it's probably much higher than that. There is another study I want to share with you in the British Medical Journal, which is also a very, very, excellent source of literature, medical literature. It was out in September of 2020, which included 31 scientific papers, and it determined that antibiotics that are commonly used in the primary care setting did show a negative impact and quite rapid impact on the gut microbiota. What does it do? Well, it not only kills the bad guys, but it kills a lot of the good guys, and even so much of the good guys that the not so good guys tend to flex their muscles afterwards, and they come back fiercely, right? As I've all heard of infections like C. diff, Clostridium difficile, which is one of the worst bacterial infections of the colon. It causes that just gnarly, bloody diarrhea. People can die from this. It is almost always started because of a previous course of antibiotics, for example. And in this study, September 2020, in the British Medical Journal, they were looking at over 31 scientific papers, and they determined, yes, antibiotics that are commonly used in just the regular primary care setting showed not only a very rapid impact, but a significant impact on the gut microbiota, decreasing the commensal bacterial levels and decreasing the diversity of the gut bacteria. Remember, we started with diversity is the spice of life. We want diversity. We literally want as many different types, especially the helpful strains of bacteria present in our gut. And one of the things antibiotics do is they mess with that. They decrease the diversity, and it can cause weeks to months, up to 6 months or more, to recover after a single course of antibiotics. And that's in the British Medical Journal, September of 2020. And this, I feel like, is not well understood, not well known, not well propagated amongst us as people, as individuals that sometimes kind of want a prescription for antibiotics. We don't realize that it can wreak havoc on our gut, and it can take months, even as many as 6 months or more, to recover from that antibiotic assault, if you will. And so this is just a word of caution. I am not being on a sort of medical pedestal here. I'm not your doctor. I'm not giving medical advice in any way, shape, or form. I'm here to give you information, encouragement, education, and maybe a little bit of entertainment too. But I am here to share information, and then you need to make your own decision. Have this discussion. Maybe next time you're in your physician's or provider's office and there may be a prescription for antibiotics, maybe just ask the question, is this absolutely necessary? Do I really, really need it? Could I wait a few more days and see what happens before I start taking it? Or just ask the question. Just ask if it's absolutely necessary or if there are any other options, because there may be, especially if it's something like a quote unquote sinus infection or an ear infection, nasal, upper respiratory infection. Almost all of these, 90+%, are viral. So mostly they don't need antibiotics. Even in the other world of antibiotic prescriptions and overprescriptions, a lot of ladies out there will commonly get prescriptions for what they think is a UTI. And it may be a bacterial UTI, but there's some other things that can cause those symptoms as well. So it's every single time you have a little bit of burning in your urination or a little bit of dysuria, it's a little bit of pain. It may or may not be a full-on UTI that needs a prescription. It certainly may be. And so it's good to get this cultured, do an actual urine culture, which sadly, present day, a lot of doctors just aren't doing anymore. It is a little bit expensive, but typically it doesn't cost you even a dime more, especially if you have health insurance. It's good to know if it's an actual full-on bacterial infection, and you can get a culture and find out. And so all I want to share with you today is how important it is to ask the question. Ask the question, especially if you have one of these upper respiratory infections, one of these things that seems so benign, during the middle of flu season, which is going to be coming up. Kids are going back to school, hit September, October, November. All of these things are going to be on the uptick, and we're going to have to ask these questions. And so I'm getting you prepared just to be armed with the knowledge that these things, meaning the antibiotics, are not so benign. They do have side effects, tremendous ones with respect to the gut. They literally cause this tremendous breakdown of the good bacteria. They decrease the population and they give a chance for the not so good ones to proliferate, cause dysbiosis, to cause all sorts of things, even bad infections, potentially like the Clostridium difficile, which I would not wish on my worst enemy. It is gnarly. And one of the up and coming treatments for this, it's literally a poop transplant, a fecal transplant, because they can't even eradicate it very well with antibiotics. It's already kind of resistant to many of them. And so that's another whole issue we can't even get into in this podcast, the whole issue of antibiotic resistance, which of course is primarily because of the overuse. And so just ask the question, is it really, really necessary? Do I really, really need this? And if you do have just a run-of-the-mill cough, cold, flu, sinus infection, earache, all of these things that commonly get prescriptions for antibiotics, you may not need one. You may, even the American Academy of Pediatrics a decade or more ago, I just commend them. They came out with this whole thing called the SNAP, like not the Snap, Crackle, Pop. Like I don't recommend those guys, but the SNAP, or the so-called safety net antibiotic prescription, which is basically in kids with a documented ear infection when they looked on otoscopy. They took that little thing and they looked in their ear and they're, oh my gosh, there's a really red eardrum back there. It may even have some pus behind it. Like it may, be a full-on ear infection, but let's just give them 48 hours and just see if they'll clear up on their own, because guess what? They often did. And so the parents would almost always want the prescription. So they would write it. They say, okay, here's the amoxicillin, but just wait 48 hours. Make sure you're giving them, anti-fever type therapy, whether it be Tylenol or ibuprofen or something for fever. Make sure they're not in pain and see what happens. Hydrate them, make sure they're getting vitamin C. They're, having these kinds of things, appropriate rest, and see what happens in 48 hours. If they're better, guess what? They don't even need the antibiotics. So we called that back in the day. It's been over a decade now. Maybe it's 15 years ago. The American Academy of Pediatrics came up with this whole idea of a safety net antibiotic prescription. In other words, they didn't tell the patient or the parents to give them the antibiotics right away. They said, just wait a couple of days. This may get better. And that was the start of, I felt like, something really good, because it really brought to light that a lot of these prescriptions were unnecessary. And like in the case of little boy Johnny, who I opened this up with, he had tremendous issues with his gut that was ultimately responsible for his evenings where he would literally wake up from sleep with terrible crampy abdominal pain. It wasn't appendicitis. It wasn't any of these other, surgical abdomen issues. It was bad gut health. It was dysbiosis. He was having lots of pain associated with gut issues. And once we kind of cleared this all up, it all came out in the history of how many times he had been on antibiotics, and also his diet. Let's just be honest. Most kids that are 5, 6, 7 years old, they're on a standard American diet, the so-called SAD diet, standard American diet, which is full of those, white and bland colored things, right? The processed foods, the cereals, the cookies, the crackers, the chips, the breads, all these things that are really not very healthy. And they cause significant dysbiosis. They cause increase in the populations of bacteria that are not good for you, right? All of these Firmicutes, genus ones that we talked about last week when we talked about the cravings that are really hard to overcome unless you change it up and you get your gut healthy. And then these cravings literally just go away, as they did in this kid, which I know it's crazy to even think about. Mom would tell me that this kid was like a candy fanatic. Halloween would come around and he would grind through all of his candy in a couple of days. I mean, he would literally just be going through it. He had just the craziest sweet tooth. And once we changed it up, we got him eating real food, just single ingredient, whole food. And it was a process. We had to kind of take one thing out at a time. 1 week it was the chips. 1 week it was the crackers. Another week it was the bread. We couldn't do it all at once, 0 to 60. That's too hard. Like, what's the kid going to eat, right? Well, I'm going to tell you, as a guy with 6 kids, if they're hungry enough, they'll eat just about anything, even if it happens to be something green or something, that you might call a vegetable that maybe they would never eat before. If they are hungry enough, I promise you, they will eat it. And if you are eating it as a parent, you're eating single ingredient whole foods, like that is awesome. It will not go unnoticed. Your kids will start to eat real whole foods as well. And that's kind of how it went down in our house. It was a process for us. We were just like everybody else. We were buying the cold cereal. We were buying the juices. I mean, our pediatrician, heck, back in the day told us, your kids got to drink a couple of glasses of juice a day. Like why? Why should they have to drink any juice? Like, eat fruit. Yeah, I'm all for eating fruit, but drink juice. Like, there's no reason any kid should be drinking juice. It's like pure instant sugar, right? The fructose, all the crap that might also be in there. Maybe they're throwing in some other high fructose corn syrup, but even just the natural fructose, which is disproportionately there because there's really no fiber in the juice. The kids are getting insulin spikes all day long from this stuff, right? The SAD diet, the standard American diet. So as we changed it up, and little boy Johnny, it was literally life-changing. All of these bowel cramps, the constipation, he did have significant constipation. All of this stuff seemed to just melt away. But from the outset, we had to back it up to literally his birth when he was first exposed to antibiotics. We had to go deep. We had to go way, way, way back. And so just to round out this first thing to try to think about, not completely avoid, because there may be a situation where your life is at risk and you need that life-threatening antibiotic assault to actually fix a problem. Maybe you have sepsis, maybe you have a horrible pneumonia or a horrible urinary or kidney infection. You do need antibiotics in these cases. And I would be the first one to prescribe you one if you needed it. But many times, especially in cough, cold, and flu season, that's just around the corner, you may not need antibiotics. So ask the question, ask your provider the question, is it necessary? Is it absolutely necessary? Are there any alternatives? And just have that frame of thought that right now, present day, at least 1 in 3 prescriptions going out, according to the CDC, for antibiotics are unnecessary. So don't let that be you, because the downstream consequences are tremendous. Most people have no idea that for months, 6 months or even more, your gut is messed up. And so if you have to be on antibiotics, you should take it if you have to be on it. Like I said, you have an overwhelming bladder or kidney infection, a horrible pneumonia, a horrible skin infection, any of these things that you absolutely need antibiotics. Yes, you should take them, but maybe also throw in a probiotic. Not in the same mouthful, of course, because they won't really be very well used, absorbed, utilized, because that antibiotic will kind of decimate that probiotic, but take them as many hours apart as you can. The best time for taking a probiotic would be in the evening on an empty stomach, giving yourself the whole night to populate your gut. And so this is not going to be a whole podcast on probiotics. There's way too much on that topic, but there may be a need for some of us, even myself. I tend to take probiotics of a couple different classes. Some of the most helpful, according to the data, I'm all about the data. We've studied probiotics a fair amount. There's hundreds and hundreds of studies, but there's some tried and true, strains out there, like the Bifidobacterium longum, for example, the Bifidobacterium lactis, the Lactobacillus acidophilus, of course, Plantarum helveticus, really helpful, Saccharomyces boulardii, another one of my favorites, Bacillus coagulans. These are some that have been tried and true that have been so helpful. The up and coming new kid on the block right now that I guess just one company so far has been able to isolate and grow is this Akkermansia mucinophila. I personally don't buy that one. It's super expensive. And I found that you can increase the population in your own gut by taking foods that will encourage its growth, right? The prebiotic rich foods that this bacteria Akkermansia loves, and it tends to be the bright purplish colored things, right? The really bright berries, the pomegranates, the cranberries. And so I've even incorporated a cranberry type supplement that will increase the propagation proliferation of this species, Akkermansia, because it is so, so important. In fact, Akkermansia builds that thickened mucus gut lining that protects you from the outside world. It protects you not only from the invaders, but from undigested food and allergens and things like that, getting across that very thin one cell thick, less than the thickness of a human hair, super thin membrane that literally is between the outside and the inside. The very important inside, your bloodstream, is literally just separated by this one cell thickness. But if this bacteria is allowed to grow and replenish and repopulate, propagate, it can build up this really thick mucus that will help protect that lining of the gut so that you don't get a leaky gut, so that you don't get increased intestinal permeability, so that you don't get dysbiosis and leaky gut. So increasing the colonies of Akkermansia through this bright purplish colored diet. Beets are one of my favorites as well. Many of you know that I love beets. There's this beet salad that has goat cheese and walnuts and pecans, and my mouth is watering just thinking about it. So amazing, amazing stuff. So gut health, it is that important. Pay attention to any antibiotic prescriptions that you may or may not get. And just ask the question, is it necessary? Is it absolutely necessary? And also think about repopulating that gut with the good bacteria through probiotics. And if you want to get more detailed recommendations from me, you want to know exactly what I take, please reach out to me. You can reach out to me on Instagram, Dr. Thomas Hemingway. You can even email me at aloha, 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 surf, SURF, doc. You guys know that was my former Instagram handle, aloha surf doc at gmail.com. I'd be happy to make some recommendations. Just share with you what I am taking as well, because I feel like there's a big need. And this was one of the things that helped little boy Johnny get his gut back into shape. We did put him on some probiotics in addition to changing up that diet to my favorite, the single ingredient whole foods diet. So that's number one. You always consider these antibiotics and the potential downsides that could happen. Number two is one of my favorites because I right now am avoiding that number two. And that number two to avoid is the sedentary lifestyle. You guys have all heard of that new, very popularized quote, sitting is the new smoking. Well, it isn't really, but what it does do is it increases your chances of basically an early death and every other medical catastrophe that you can even imagine. The more you sit, the more that you stand, the more that you move your body. You guys know that I'm all about the 6 for 6 that my wife Brooke shares and is always posting workouts on Instagram. I mean, I can hardly keep up with her. She is amazing, incredible. I even do a little bit of a 7 for 7, which is just move your body every single day. I don't work hard on that 7th day. I usually have a pretty chill day, but I always go for a couple of walks each and every day because I just love it. I love walking. In fact, Hippocrates over 2,000 years ago said, walking is a man's best medicine. Walking is a man's best medicine. Another quote I wanted to share with you today, I just thought of it, is one of my favorites from a dude by the name of Jim Rohn. This was like the pre-Tony Robbins, like personal development guy. If you guys know Tony Robbins, like literally he got all his stuff, at least at the beginning, he got it all from Jim Rohn. Like he literally learned from him, went to his seminars. Jim Rohn was like one of the OGs, right? Zig Ziglar, Jim Rohn, some of the OGs. Well, he said this, quote, take care of your body. It's the only place you have to live. And later in that little chapter, he's got an amazing book on just pearls of wisdom that helped him throughout his life. And he's got a whole health chapter in there. And this is, 50 plus years ago when people didn't really talk about health that much. So he was ahead of his time. He understood that your body is indeed your temple. Take care of it as such. Pay attention, right, to what goes in it. It is not just the bottomless pit that I was accused of having as a teenager. I could literally eat anything and everything, and I never seemed to gain a pound. And it just seemed to, I don't know what happened, right? I didn't purposely eat dirt or garbage or all the sad foods out there. I definitely had my share. I used to eat cornflakes for breakfast. We couldn't afford the real fancy stuff like the Cheerios and the Honey Nut Cheerios and the Life cereal and the Chex and Crispix, all these kind of more designer breakfast cereals. We couldn't afford that. We ate like good old fashioned cornflakes, the OG Kellogg. Gosh, if you know that story, that is a wild and crazy story about how Kellogg's cornflakes came about to basically stunt the sexual desires of men. because they knew if you ate a crappy diet, your testosterone levels would drop and you wouldn't be so hypersexual. And so the Seventh-day Adventist folks, I think it was them or one of the earlier predecessors, got this going on with Harvey Kellogg. His brother snaked the recipe, literally stole it from him. And he was the one that made all the money, not the original guy who came up with it. So there's lots of drama in there. If you guys want to hear the whole story, listen to my podcast on breakfast cereals or about breakfast. It's pretty wacky, crazy, but I got a little bit off on a tangent there. But what I wanted to say is a sedentary lifestyle can definitely not only stunt your gut health, but also your lifespan. Like we said, sitting is the new smoking. In other words, it increases your chance of a premature death and basically every other health condition if you sit more. But if you do the opposite, like what I'm doing while I'm talking to you right now, I'm in a standing desk, which is not fancy, but it's, I got my computer on a stack of books. It's funny. I mentioned Tony Robbins. I have his book on my stack, Unshakable. It's a finance book. I have Ed Milet's The Power of One More. I have Nina Teichold's book, The Big Fat Surprise. I literally have them on my desk here, supporting my computer, turning it into a standing desk. I also have a copy of my book, Preventable, in that stack. And my computer is levitating on this stack of books. And so it can be that easy to convert your workspace into a standing desk, either like I've done right here and now today with a stack of books, or you can use a box. Most of us have many of those boxes coming in the mail at any given week from the Big A or some other place that sends you stuff at home that you've purchased online. Literally just tape one of those up so it's a little bit more sturdy, throw your computer on top of that, and you got a standing desk. It is that easy. In fact, what's interesting, we've talked about this in previous podcasts on metabolism. And I used to believe this, that as you age, it's just a fact, your metabolism slows down, right? I mean, that's why in our 30s and 40s and of course 50s, we just seem to get that little extra midsection, the spare tire as is called, or the beer belly or whatever it is. We get this extra gut, we get this extra inches around the waist that we didn't used to have. We just blame it on a metabolism that's slowed down. Well, BS, the data does not support that, at least up until the age of 60. And I'm at least 10 years out from that. I can't blame my metabolism on my age. At least until 60, it does not significantly slow down. What slows down is us. We slow down. We don't move as much. And you guys would believe that immediately if you saw my 5-year-old running around. She's literally on her bike all day long. My 7-year-old as well. It just makes me so excited and happy to see them biking around and jumping on the trampoline and doing all these things. And I just try to keep up. And that's the beauty of having young kids. When you're in your 50th year, you got to keep up. You have no choice. And this is one of the things that helps me each and every day, is to move my body. And a simple standing desk can do this. In fact, the data show that a sedentary lifestyle is strongly associated. So the more you sit, the more likely you are to get these leading causes of death, including heart disease, cancer, type 2 diabetes, premature death. Like, all of these things are so much more probable the more hours that you sit in a day. And that is according to this study, Park Jung, from the Korean Journal of Family Medicine in 2020, entitled Sedentary Lifestyle, Overview of Updated Evidence of Potential Health Risks. So right there, we talked about avoiding unnecessary antibiotics, avoiding unnecessary sedentary activities. Like, yeah, we all got to sit at some point. We can't stand the whole day. We want to have a seat if we're eating a meal. I think that's just more traditional. You want to sit around the table and yappity yap with your family, your friends, your loved ones. One of my favorite things to do. In fact, I just got reminded of this last night. We were having a little birthday celebration with my daughter, who just turned 8. And we were talking about some of our favorite memories. And one of my favorites was a recent trip that we had, where we literally had the opportunity to sit around a table 3 meals a day and have family meals, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, 3 meals a day together as a family. And although this trip was amazing, we got to do lots of cool stuff in a cool place with cool activities and beautiful environments and warm water, and it's just amazing. But honestly, the thing that I enjoyed most was sitting around that table 3 times a day with my wife and kids and just talking story, eating real foods, just amazing. We got fed amazing single ingredient, real food, just awesomeness all day long, just all the fruits we could ever want, all the coconut water we could ever want. I mean, it was amazing. And that was the thing I loved, is that we got to sit and chat, vala'au, as we say in Hawaii, with talk story with our family and loved ones. I love, love, love that. And I definitely do my share of sitting, but when I can move, I do it. And right now, and as often as I can at work, if I'm at work in the hospital, I am always standing. I've grabbed one of these countertops with the computer on top, and I've kind of designated that my desk, because I like to stand while I work. I like to kind of wiggle my feet and my toes and my knees, and I just can't help myself. I love to move. I don't quite have the music rolling through like my daughters have. They're like always singing a song. They get that after my wife. They can literally memorize lyrics like nobody's business. I'm not quite talented in that way, but I love to keep moving. And so what's interesting, we were taking a look here. There's a study about not only the sedentary lifestyle, increasing your chances of every kind of medical malady and early death, but also there's a study that looks specifically at gut health. And it's been shown that sedentary behavior is linked to a decrease in diversity. That is not what we want. We talked about that, right? That is absolutely not what we want. We want more diversity. Like we talked about in the very beginning, diversity is the spice of life, and we want diversity. In fact, this article in 2017 Plus One by Carlo Bressa, entitled Differences in Gut Microbiota Profile Between Women with Active Lifestyle and Sedentary Women. And so this actually started to elucidate these important differences that can be seen in our gut health, whether we're active or not. So moral of the story is you want to be active. You want to be moving. You want to be standing. You want to be, if you can't stand at your job, get up once an hour for a couple of minutes and go for a quick walk around your work environment, go up and down the stairs. We had a fun opportunity in Honolulu a few weeks ago. We got to go up and down. They have more of these sort of skyscraper type structures. We were on like it was 35th floor, and we were going up and down the stairs in the stairwell. And it was crazy. Like, I didn't know that my legs, I thought I was in pretty good shape, but like after a couple of days of doing this, my legs were kind of sore going up and down the stairs. It was a lot of fun. Something my boys and I had fun with, but things like that. It doesn't matter what you do so much, just do something, move your body. So this study, like I just shared with you, showed that more sedentary activity, less movement, will actually decrease your gut bacterial diversity. That's not what you want. You want diversity. In fact, it showed that beneficial strains, the health promoting strains like Akkermansia, those colonies would decrease in sedentary behavior. But once you changed it up, and these healthier folks that were more active, they had increases in these helpful strains like Akkermansia and others, Lactobacillus longum and Bifidobacterium longum, Lactobacillus acidophilus, and Rhamnosus plantarum helveticus, Saccharomyces boulardii. All of these tended to increase with more activity and sadly decrease with less activity. So get up and move your body. Last study I wanted to share was from the Journal of the American College of Cardiology. And what that showed is that was nearly a dose response curve. So what that means is as you did more of the activity, whatever it was, walking, running, fitness, weightlifting, body weight activities, whatever it was, as you increased your activity, this showed basically a 1-to-1 direct dose response correlation with a decrease in your mortality. So you lived longer. You died less soon, you lived longer, and this was accomplished in as little as 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week. That seemed to do the trick. So movement for the win. And so it doesn't have to be difficult. You don't have to get a gym membership. You can do like I do and just stand up and work as much as you can, then go for a couple of walks throughout the day. The way I like to bang it out is 10 minutes after each meal. I do 3 meals a day myself. If I walk for 10 minutes after each meal, right there, I've accomplished my 30 minutes of activity. I typically do something else because I can't sit still. As you can tell, if you're watching me on YouTube, I love to move. I love to get out and surf or bike or snowboard, ski, climb, like anything that involves body movement. I am all over that. I just can't help myself. But if you just do the simple task of 10 minutes after every meal, cha-ching, you've done it. You've accomplished that 30 minutes a day, 150 minutes plus per week, which will show as a decrease in mortality, improvement in your overall health, and less of these chronic diseases. It is that simple. So rounding it out today, I know we're coming up on 40 something minutes. So I'm going to give you the second half of this next week, because I really want to focus on some of these other things that many of us don't think about that actually have a tremendous negative impact. We started the conversation today with something that sometimes we feel like we don't have a lot of control over, right? Because the doctor writes the prescription. The doc wrote me for the antibiotics. If he or she wrote it, I must take it. Well, maybe they didn't have to write it in the first place. Next week, we will talk about more in detail a couple of the other things that you should avoid, like some over-the-counter type medicinals that we've always been told are fine, right? You get it over the counter, it can't really hurt you. Well, so we're going to get into that. What are the over-the-counter things to avoid? A lot of the other things we'll get into next week. I wanted to round this out on one of my favorite topics, which is sleep, because this was one of the things I was lacking, and poor sleep indeed also damages the gut and can lead to gut dysbiosis. There was actually an interesting article in the journal Frontiers in Psychiatry that looked at this specifically, and they found that decrease, or as they described it, sleep loss in humans was directly associated with dysbiosis. And this resulting shift in the microbiota also led towards metabolic imbalances. So not only did it lead to decreased diversity, but it messed with your metabolism if you didn't sleep well. And so this article was 2018, Frontiers in Psychiatry, by Lee et al., the role of the microbiome in insomnia, circadian disturbance, and depression. So do not underestimate, as I did for many decades of my life, sadly. I used that famous Cure song, I'll sleep when I'm dead, or sleep when you're dead, right? From the 513 Dream album. Like, I used that as my mantra for way too many decades in my life. You cannot wait to sleep when you're dead. In fact, I don't think we'll be doing any sleeping at all. Maybe our mortal body in the grave, so to speak, but I don't know if we'll be getting any sleep. So you got to sleep now, right now, because it positively will improve almost every aspect of your life if you get appropriate sleep. Just ask my wife. I used to be kind of a grouch, and part of the reason, and I didn't appreciate it, was I was basically surviving. I was not thriving. I was surviving off of the bare minimum, 4 to 6 hours of sleep maximum for like 20 years, decades of my life. And I don't do this anymore. She actually harps on me, because now I like to sleep. I like to get 7 hours or even 8. My goal is actually 8. If I get 7, I'm doing great, because for many years I did 4, 5, and 6. And so 7 is still a great number for me. I still strive for 8. If the surf's really, really good, I'm going to skip and I'm going to get up early. But I'll try to go to bed a little earlier. But sleep is now my new superpower. It's literally my new superpower. And there was another article I wanted to share. And this one, the previous one was from Frontiers in Psychiatry. This one is, let me just pull it up real quick for you. This one was from Sleep Medicine, and from 2020 by Brittany Matenchuk et al. And it's entitled Sleep, Circadian Rhythm, and Gut Microbiota. And I wanted to bring this one up because it talked about not only the issues with sleep, but how if we're not getting consistent, solid, restful sleep, that it messes with not just our microbiome, but also with us, our frame of mind, our psyche, if you will. Resulting in nervous system dysfunction, levels of neurotransmitters that were not helpful for health, and even psychiatric symptoms, starting a vicious cycle, a downward trend. Maybe you've had some of this. Maybe it was brain fog. Maybe it was anxiety. I know in the times where I really wasn't sleeping well, I was way more anxious and just edgy. And now that's one of the criteria I use to sort of manage, besides just kind of knowing how many hours I slept. But if I didn't, maybe I got up super early to surf, and then later that afternoon, I'm like a little bit cranky and testy. I go back, wait a minute, did I get a solid 7 hours, 8 hours of sleep last night? Like, what was the cause of this, testiness or a little bit of agitation or anxiety that I'm experiencing? And often I can trace it back to poor sleep or just inadequate sleep. So if you need the full skinny on how to sleep and make that your superpower, make it the most effective, restful night's sleep ever, I've done many, many podcasts on that. I like to just share quickly the 3-2-1 rule. 3 hours before bed, try not to eat anything with calories. If you got to have a sip of tea or a sip of water, don't drink a lot, because if you're getting old like me, you're going to be peeing all night, especially as a dude with that prostate issue that kind of comes up. You're going to be getting up to pee anyway. So I try not to drink much of anything before bed, and I try not to eat anything 3 hours before bed. And that's super helpful. And 2 hours before bed, I'm trying to not really do any significant work, definitely not any significant exhaustive physical activity. I might still go for a walk. My wife and I like to take late night walks sometimes just to get some fresh air, kind of reset, kind of talk about the day and what's happening the next day, just kind of our little planning session where we just don't like to sit still. She's like me. She likes to be on the move. So we'll often just go for a quick walk, which is at a super restful. It's at a Thomas pace. She has a different pace. The Brooke pace, she shoots out there and she's crushing it. I like to walk more leisurely. I like to enjoy my surroundings, enjoy the conversation. And so this little activity we may do some nights is not going to be full on HIIT training. So no like really hardcore exercise within 2 hours before bed. 1 hour before bed is my goal to limit the screen time. If you want to get super nerdy and into the data, it's probably better served if you do 2 hours before bed, but that's just not really practical for me. So I do about 1 hour before bedtime. I try to get those screens off and just dive in to a book with natural light. Sometimes a candlelight, sometimes a candle simulated light, sometimes just my headlamp that has a little red light setting. I actually really like that one. I used it last night, in fact. But I like to do some restful activities prior to bed, either reading or journaling, maybe a little meditation, maybe a little snuggle time, maybe just listening to music or chit-chatting with my spouse or having some time with her prior to bed. Just restful activities. Maybe it's a warm bath. If it's the cold of winter and I happen to be in the mountains, I might be dipping in that hot tub or what have you, to kind of get into that restful evening, mellow mood, which is conducive to sleep. So that 1 hour before bed should really be sort of prepping you to be in that restful state. And hopefully you can avoid the screens during that 1 hour. And if you can't, set a goal for 30 minutes. I really feel like we can all do 30 minutes. If that seems like too much, set a goal for 15 minutes and work up to 30, work up to 1 hour. And if you can get up to the 2 hour mark, I applaud you. I am impressed. I haven't been able to do it yet. I'm still working on it. Screens just occupy so much of our lives. And let's just face it, with 6 kids, you got to get some work done once they go to bed. And so I definitely set my goal at 1 hour before bed, no screen time. And it's made a big difference. My sleep is more restful. My wheels aren't turning, as you will. Like if you literally turn the phone off right before you shut your eyes, the wheels are turning up there. You can't just jump into a restful sleep. I can't do it. Maybe you can. I don't know. Maybe you're the outlier, the anomaly in that way. But turning off those screens at least an hour before bed, that's been a game changer for me. So we can't wait to sleep when we're dead. Sleep should be our superpower. And for all the deets on that, go back and re-listen to the podcast or 2 or 3 that I've done on sleep. There's also a full chapter in my book, Preventable: 5 Powerful Practices to Avoid Disease and Build Unshakable Health on Sleep. And there's a little bit of a bonus section as well on the whole back half of the book that talks about the microbiota, which we're talking a little bit about today. So just remember, sleep can be your superpower. You have got this. You can do this. You can crush this. And just start with a little at a time. Make it a non-negotiable. If it's 10 minutes that you're going to go without your screen, and increase it to 15 next week, 20 the following week. And by a month, you're already up to 30 minutes. And then a few months after that, you're up to 60 minutes. Like, you are crushing it. Start with a non-negotiable, baby steps, do them every day, and you will find how easy it can be and how darn beneficial. So I'm going to cut myself off there. I could go on solo casting for hours, but I want to save some for next week, where I will talk about round 2 the gut wreckers, the things to avoid that can wreak havoc on your gut and your life. And for now, just enjoy this week. Set some little goals for yourself. Maybe it's to have a little bit more sleep. Maybe it's to have a little bit less screen time prior to bed. Maybe it's to just change up that routine a bit at night. Maybe it is to consider a probiotic. Maybe it is to talk with your doctor, he or she or your provider, next time they mention an antibiotic prescription, maybe in your future. Just say, hey, is it necessary? Is it absolutely necessary? Are there any alternatives? Right? There are options. There are options. And get up and move your body each and every day as much as possible. Get a standing desk, throw that box on top of there, a stack of books like I have today. Whatever that is, walk for 10 minutes after every meal. You got 30 already. Make it simple, make it non-negotiable. These things, though small, are powerful and they will move the needle. Make sure you write, you share, review, you subscribe, all the things so you never miss out. And let me know what you're loving. Tag me.